Hey folks, George here. Today we're going to talk about virtue ethics. Now in virtue ethics, I'm going to take the initiative and divide this up into two different philosophers. The first, of course, obviously, is going to be Aristotle. Aristotle and his ideas certainly set the foundation for virtue ethics. The second philosopher that I'll discuss, though, in a different video is Nichomachean. So let's first discuss Aristotle's ideas in his Nichomachean Ethics. The reading that we have here starts by asking us, what is it that we all seek? Right? Now, different people seek different things without question. However, Aristotle's going to say, what is it that we seek for its own sake, as the ultimate end? Right? His answer to this, of course, is going to be happiness. Happiness is the end that we all seek, not for a greater thing. How does the argument kind of go? The question might be, why are you studying philosophy? Well, I'm studying philosophy because I want to get a job as a philosopher. Great. Why do you want a job? Right? And somebody might say, well, because I need money. Okay. Why do you need money? Well, I need money to pay the bills, to pay for my house. Why do you want to live in a house? Because I want to be safe and secure and things like that. Well, why do you want all that? And I want to support my family. Why do you want all that? And I think the ultimate answer, according to Aristotle, is going to be, because I want to be happy. And Aristotle is going to say, it doesn't make sense to ask a question after that. Why do you want to be happy? Why do you want to be happy? Doesn't quite make sense. So the questions stop at happiness. And so happiness is going to be that ultimate end for which we don't ask a further question, why do this? Right? You can't ask, why do you want to be happy? That's the ultimate end for Aristotle. It would be absurd, according to Aristotle, to ask, why do you want to be happy? We'll get a little bit clear, though, on what happiness means, because I think in our 21st century sensibilities, happiness might have different meanings. Well, it is the job of the philosopher to really explain what they mean by their terms. So we're going to really try to delve deep into what happiness actually means for Aristotle. To be sure, Aristotle does also say that what is the aim of politics, right? Because he does want the happiness of all of society. He does want to say that happiness for all of society is greater than happiness for the mere individual. So what is happiness? Well, Aristotle is quite brilliant. I love that kind of philosopher because he looks at different answers, different possible answers to this question, what is happiness? And so he considers other kinds of happiness. Is happiness pleasure? Well, he says, no, of course it's not pleasure. After all, pleasure is something that beasts enjoy. And we humans are not beasts, right? We're somehow different, at least, from beasts. So pleasure is a beastly kind of happiness. What else does he say? He considers honor. Well, what is it about honor? Honor is too superficial, according to Aristotle, because honor isn't about us. Rather, somebody else has to give us honor. Somebody else has to honor us. So it's only in their eyes that I am honorable, right? And he's saying, does that mean that I'm really honorable? Well, Aristotle doesn't quite think so. That's my understanding of how he shoots down the notion of honor to be equivalent to happiness. Another question he asks is money. Maybe money is the key to happiness, yes? It seems like Aristotle is hip to some 21st century sensibilities, to be sure. However, he's going to say, of course it can't be money. Why? Because, again, happiness is that ultimate end, the final end, the ultimate purpose, the telos, the end of the question. But money is not the end, is it? We want money for something else. Money is only good insofar as it buys things. If you don't believe me, then go to other places around the world where their money is not actually valuable. People, there are, for better or for worse, places around the world where their particular money doesn't get you very much. And thus, they say, this money is useless because it doesn't do for me what money is supposed to do. So money only has an instrumental value. It only helps you get something more. And that is why, for Aristotle, money is not going to be happiness. And to really bring the point home, he does say happiness is the ultimate end. It is the end of all action. It is the purpose. It is the telos. It is the aim that we're all striving for. Happiness is for a complete life. It is an activity of the soul. To be clear, that's not an activity for the body, but for the soul. And that's the kind of happiness he's talking about. Let's get a little bit clear here. For better or for worse, in English, much of Aristotle's writing uses the word, has translated the word into happiness. But the ancient Greek word is eudaimonia. From my perspective, from my understanding, happiness isn't the best translation for this word eudaimonia. What might be a better translation, and one that I prefer in other philosophical writings? Flourishing. Flourishingness. Because after all, he did say happiness is for a complete life. Happiness is not about pleasure. With those ideas in mind, happiness is not what some of us might think about regarding happiness. Rather, happiness is for the complete life. I like to say a flourishing life. I didn't invent that translation. Other smarter philosophers than I have come up with that. However, I do prefer that notion, flourishing, to the notion of happiness, because in English, happiness has too weighty a meaning that might not quite jive with Aristotle's notion of eudaimonia, right? So I like this flourishing life. So the question is, what is a flourishing life? Well, again, Aristotle's philosophy, not just his ethical philosophy, but also his metaphysics and so on, really focuses on this idea of telos, or the purpose, or the aim, or the goal of things. So Aristotle poses the question, what is the function, or the purpose, or the telos of human life? What is that purpose? And again, it can't be pleasure, because beasts have pleasure. Aristotle comes to the conclusion that reason is the aim of human life, because humans are the only ones that have and use reason. That's according to Aristotle. If you think your dog uses reason, God bless you. But that's not Aristotle's idea. We can talk about your philosophy of animalistic reason somewhere else, later perhaps. But for Aristotle, it's this unique thing to human life, reason, rationale, rational thinking, that humans have, that plants don't have. So yeah, what is the purpose of human life? It's not even to live, according to Aristotle, because after all, plants live, animals live. The unique thing to humans is rational thinking, reason, the use of reason. By the way, what that means is, in the same way that he said happiness is the purpose of life, and now he's saying reason is the purpose of life, there's going to be an equation there. At least that's my interpretation. Happiness equals reason. Happiness equals a reasonable life. Happiness equals rational thinking, at least from the human perspective, according to Aristotle. And what is reason good for? What does reason do? What does reason help us do? According to Aristotle, reason entails virtue. Reason teaches us about virtue, how to live a virtuous life, how to become virtuous. Reason is for virtue. So, continuing that equation that I just gave, happiness equals rational thinking equals virtue. Happiness and reason equals virtue. Entails virtue, leads to virtue. This is my interpretation of this. I'm trying to make sense of this just like everybody else, after all. And what does he say? Just like he says about happiness. Happiness is about activity of the soul. Virtue is activity of the soul. Not activity of the body, but activity of the soul. And so, what is virtue then? That he's continuing on with his clarifications. What is virtue? Well, he suggests that there's two kinds of virtue. There's intellectual virtue and there's moral virtue. Well, let's talk about intellectual virtue for a second. Intellectual virtue is the kind of things that we could learn by reading or by being taught certain things. That's the intellect. However, moral virtue is different. Moral virtue has to be developed through habit. Developing virtuous habits. So if I continue with my equation a little bit, happiness equals reason equals virtue equals good habits. Right? Well, how do we develop good habits then? First, you have to practice to develop good habits, don't you? The example he gives is the harpist. And I like musicians. Don't musicians, in order to be good musicians, don't they just have to practice? And so he says with virtue and developing good habits, virtuous habits. Practice. When does practice start? Of course, in childhood. In childhood, we practice good habits, don't we? Don't we teach children, or at least I was taught when I was a child, say please, say thank you. And so you just kind of automatically, when I was a child, can I have a cookie, Mom? She said, what are you supposed to say? Please, may I have a cookie, Mother? Or something like that, right? And of course, as a child, you're not doing it for the right reasons. That's important to Aristotle. That is important to Aristotle. You have to do it for the right reasons. Virtue is doing it for the right reasons. As a child, you don't quite understand that, but you are developing the habits so that you will eventually say please and thank you for the right reasons. That is because it's a virtuous thing to do, to be humble when you ask for things, to be grateful when things are given to you. Of course, that's the real reason to say please and thank you. Children can't quite get that, right? So we just tell children, say please, say thank you. And hopefully they develop those good habits from childhood. So what are virtues though? Well, virtues are going to be these things like good virtuous principles. It's not just going to be hard and fast rules, right? The real virtue would be humility or gratefulness, gratitude, right? Those are the real virtues. And what does that mean? You're not always humble in every single situation, are you? You have to be humble in the right place at the right time. We'll talk about that. I'll get clear on that a little bit later. But humility isn't always the same humility in every single place. Rather, you have this principled virtue of humility or gratitude. And so sometimes you are grateful by merely saying thank you. But sometimes you need a little bit more to say thank you. Another thing that my mom always taught me to do, told me to do, asked me to do, was write thank you notes. Sometimes it's not merely enough to say thank you, but depending on the situation, gratitude requires thank you notes. Sometimes gratitude requires more. Sometimes gratitude requires less. There's no hard and fast rules. The principle, however, of gratitude is very important. That's the virtue. And you have to do it for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? Because you are grateful. Because it's virtuous to be grateful. And so what is this grateful virtue? What does it do? It develops virtuous character in me. Yeah? I become a virtuous person as a result of saying please and thank you at the right times and expressing gratitude in the right ways for the right reasons. And doing it for the right reasons, not merely doing it. Now, I might ruffle some feathers here, but when I hear a child, especially when the mother says, George, I want that toy. And I say, okay, I'll give you the toy. But then the mother jumps in and says, what are you supposed to say? And then the child says, please, may I have the toy? Or something like that, right? Now, is the child doing it for the right reasons? My hunch, forgive me, but my hunch is not quite. Maybe not. The child isn't always doing it for the right reasons. But ideally, when you do develop the proper virtue, you do eventually do it for the right reasons because your character has changed. And in a small child who just has to be told all the time, say please, say thank you. In that small child, they haven't developed the character yet. But by the time you become an adult, hopefully sometime earlier, you are doing it deliberately. And you are doing it for the right reasons. And you are acting grateful. You're not merely uttering, thank you, please, thank you. You are actually acting in a virtuous manner, and you are acting with a virtuous character, such that your whole life is imbued, presumably, with gratitude. And isn't that what virtue is, according to Aristotle? So what does this mean about expressing your virtuous and grateful character in the right places at the right time? Well, Aristotle gives us this notion of the golden mean. The golden mean. Sometimes excessive virtue, or of, let's say, gratitude, I've already started talking about gratitude, sometimes excessive gratitude is inappropriate, isn't it? I'm remembering this, forgive me for bringing up this terrible example, but I'm remembering a humorous movie from my youth called Animal House, where they're smacking these pledges, and they're abusing people, actually. They're abusing these pledges to a fraternity, and the fraternity pledges say, thank you, sir, may I have another? Thank you, sir, may I have another? Aristotle would say, that's not virtuous character. You shouldn't be grateful for suffering abuse, like these pledges in the film Animal House. Thank you, sir, may I have another? But on the other end of the spectrum, there are those people who are not grateful at all, who lack all sorts of gratitude. And so there are these two extremes, being overly gracious, right, where you are susceptible to abuse, versus being completely ungrateful altogether. What Aristotle says is the virtue is this golden mean, somewhere in between these two extremes. And that's what makes all of this so hard. Aristotle admits that it's really hard. This is hard, to be virtuous. What does Aristotle say about this golden mean? He says you have to be virtuous, let's say grateful, at the right times, for the right objects, towards the right persons, for the right motives, and in the right manner, is the mean or the best good, which signifies virtue. We have to find that golden mean in between these two extremes. He acknowledges, however, he does acknowledge that not everything has a golden mean. There are terrible vices. For example, being a serial killer. There is no such thing as a virtuous serial killer, according to Aristotle, let's say. Now, I know that there's this TV show that it was popular some time ago where there is a serial killer who tries to practice virtue in a very interesting way. I think it's called Dexter, yes. Aristotle would say, you can't be a virtuous serial killer. There isn't this, there's too much serial killing or too little serial killing, or maybe there's right in the middle, just the right amount of serial killing. Aristotle, I have a hunch, and I would, at least under my interpretation, there isn't a virtuous kind of serial killing. Of course, Dexter is an interesting TV show. However, I would have a hunch that Aristotle would say something like, couldn't he have expressed justice? Because isn't that what Dexter's about? Finding justice and bringing justice to bad people? Isn't there a better way of bringing justice to people, right? I think that's where Aristotle would evaluate, how Aristotle would evaluate a TV show like Dexter. And, like I said earlier, virtue is hard. Why? Because it is between these two extremes. What does he say? He says, good is simple, evil is manifold, evil is infinite, good is finite. That's why it's so hard. That's why goodness is rare and praiseworthy and noble. It depends on our circumstances. It depends on our perception. And so that's why the hard thing to do is to use our capacity for reason, to develop a flourishing life filled with virtue. And that's going to give us a eudaimonic life. Some people have translated that as happiness. And we will be in the habit of acting in a virtuous manner with virtuous character. I hope that helps clarify some of Aristotle's ideas on virtue ethics. Next time, we'll talk about McIntyre's refining of some of those ideas or further elucidations of those ideas. See you next time.